Thank you for everyone for being here this afternoon. This is a webinar for the Houston chapter of the Association of Certified E-Discovery Specialists. This is the part 2 in a series about using artificial intelligence and machine learning on every case. Part 1 of our series was more of a general overview about some of the practical applications and differentiations in types of machine learning. Today will be more of the first deep dive into fact finding and how to use AI and machine learning for those purposes. Let me get started by first introducing our panelists. Our first panelist is Ms. Sumaira Khan. Sumaira is Vice President and Associate General Counsel at Tokyo Marine HCC. Within her role, Sumaira works with numerous business units across the company to respond to complex litigation and dispute matters. She uses her knowledge of litigation, technology, discovery, and data to develop efficient strategies and early case resolutions. Sumaira spent over 10 years practicing law at an international law firm where she specialized in commercial litigation, particularly the discovery phase, and also advised clients on fact investigations related to cybersecurity incident response. My second panelist is Dawad Burke. Dawad Burke is the Advanced Client Data Solutions Technology and Analytics Advisor at Hogan Lovells. Dawad provides subject matter expertise to the firm's clients and case teams using advanced analytic strategies to identify relevant evidence in investigations, find key patterns, and reduce the burden and costs associated with the review of big data. Dawad has been navigating the terrain of e-discovery for the past 19 years. He's assisted legal teams and corporate clients from both sides of the e-discovery vendor and law firm consulting practices. Our third panelist is Charles Duff. Charles is a longtime e-discovery and investigations enthusiast, focusing primarily on understanding, applying, and teaching advanced AI and machine learning techniques and workflows at all phases of the EDRM. Charles holds the position of Director at Large for the ACEDS Houston chapter, where he helps direct and facilitate the mission of ACEDS and the e-discovery education of its members. At Reveal Brainspace, he is responsible for helping clients understand the full power of the many forms of AI and how it can be applied to structured and unstructured data to gain insight quickly and make better, faster, and more informed decisions for their legal investigations matters. Prior to Reveal, Charles helped create and design the direction of 2 e-discovery platforms, then spent 6 years as the Senior Solutions Architect at Brainspace, where he helped lead expansion in legal, federal, financial, life sciences, and energy enterprise markets across 5 continents. I'm your moderator. My name is Stephen Page. I'm also a director here in the ACEDS Houston chapter and a litigation paralegal at Michelman and Robinson. And thank you all again for joining us today. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping announcements. Besides this webinar, we will be planning an in-person social for the Houston chapter, possibly in conjunction with other Texas chapters, sometime in October, mid-October it seems. And we will be doing that in conjunction with a technology showcase, showcasing some artificial intelligence vendors and their tools to our members and people across the state. If you have any questions for our panelists, please save them till the end, or feel free to type them into the chat, and we'll field them at the end. We'll have some time allowed for them to answer them. So all that being said, thanks everyone again for joining us. We're going to, I guess I should have showed that while I was introducing you guys. We'll go ahead and skip right to just sort of a general overview, some takeaways from our last session about artificial intelligence and how companies are applying it to manage cases and disputes. And Charles, why don't you tell me what AI is to you?
Sure. First of all, thank you everyone for joining, and Steve for moderating. And Dawad, I'm not sure if this was mentioned, as the president of the Houston ACEDS chapters, and has been naturally an immense help putting all of this together. And then Sumera, amazing. We really needed, we felt like we needed a third panelist coming from the corporate and law firm world. And Sumera was the perfect candidate and has been deeply involved in the creation of this webinar. So thank you, Sumera, for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. You know, the first session that we had back in April, covering the top 3 ways, and of course today we're talking about in more detail the first of those 3 ways. Why do we use AI and machine learning at all in e-discovery, right? What are we trying to accomplish? And you know, it's very important to understand that it's all about what I refer to, and many others in our field refer to, as augmented intelligence, right? You're not replacing people with these forms of AI and machine learning. You're really taking the best of both worlds. You're trying to take what the subject matter expert, the attorney, the regulatory agency analyst, whoever is looking at that data, you're trying to take their knowledge from a complaint, keywords, people talking to other people, whatever relevant or valuable means for that case, cross-reference what you know with what is actually in the data. And because data just over time is in many different forms, including, you know, short message content is becoming much more prevalent in these cases, you can't read it all, right? It's becoming way too big, way too much. And your team, most likely, is not growing at the same rate of the data. And so we can use unsupervised machine learning that typically is, you can think of it as more of a tell me what I don't know, right? We're talking about concept search and visual analytics like cluster wheels and so on. And then the supervised learning, which is sort of give me more like this, right? I tell you something is valuable and you predict for me what else in that data is likely to be valuable, right? And so the use of AI, if you think about it like that, it's really just to augment, to marry up what you know with what is actually in the data. And it all comes down to decrease in burden of time and cost, and certainly being able to counteract overly broad non-relevant data, because we always want to do those 2 things, right? We want to find the relevant, whatever that means for that case, relevant to different issues. If it's privileged, then we'll say that would be the positive or the valuable. But we're always trying to find the valuable while decreasing the amount of non-valuable that it takes us to get to that same place. And everything that we talk about today, actually everything that we talk about for the duration of this series of webinars, is focused on exactly that.
Yeah.
Dawad, what about you? What does AI mean to you?
I think the best way to define artificial intelligence, now I'll begin with artificial intelligence, that will benefit our audience, is by describing what it is not. AI is not a group of sentient beings or robotic lawyers trying to take one's job, right? AI are algorithms or tools, if you will, that help us to do our jobs more efficiently. AI doesn't replace humans, obviously. It augments our ability, as Charles said, to perform our jobs faster and reduces the time, effort, and spend to do so. So AI, you could think of AI as a symbiotic relationship between human and machine, or in this case, lawyer and machine. So the human is not removed from the process at all. AI is used to assist and help, and you identify the tools which would best meet your own workflows. So within the context of legal discovery, AI enhances your job by helping you create efficiencies in your review workflows and in your investigations, for example. So AI really supercharges what you can really do. AI is the umbrella by which you find tools like machine learning, classification, sentiment analysis, anomaly detection, which allow you to streamline and expedite the document review process while also getting key documents to the hands of attorneys faster. So AI really helps you to do more with less. The other thing I would add to contribute to this part of the slide or this discussion is that machine learning is a component of legal AI that uses algorithms that enhance human review by leveraging human coding decisions to find more documents like this, or uses conceptual or topical similarities within the data set to derive relationships within your data set and groups them together for you to quickly identify what is relevant or not relevant for your review.
Well said. Excellent. All right. Well, let's actually dive into some fact finding now. Our first element will be before there's a suit, pre-dispute investigations. Samara, why don't you tell us how we can leverage AI in those situations?
Yeah, sure, and happy to do so. I'll say that, you know, the perspective that I have as outside counsel and now recently minted in-house counsel, and I'll piggyback on what the panelists have already said, which is that AI is I like the word supercharger. It's a supercharger, and it breeds efficiency, which from a time and cost perspective is necessary, and it's a necessary component of what we're constantly advising clients on. I will say that as attorneys and just maybe as people, we're also creatures of habit. So this concept of AI is kind of an evolving trend on the, you know, maybe we're more familiar with it, you know, when we have documents or data, you know, for purposes of discovery, we need to charge through and make a production and go through that typical EDRM cycle. But the reason I volunteered to pipe in or lead discussions on this pre-dispute side is that the concept of AI can be actually very important before even litigation is filed, before an investigation comes through the door, and it can happen in many ways. You know, when you're investigating something internally, which is a lot of the work that I'm handling here in-house, whether it's on the employee side, customer side, broker side, you know, the goal is to prevent a dispute or prevent litigation. And in order to do that, you're trying to get a quick grasp of the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, the how, you know, those kind of typical questions. You want to try to get to, you know, what are the hot documents, what are the key dates and the facts, and what are the circumstances surrounding whatever matter that you're investigating. A very easy way to do it, and this is maybe a concept for those on the call that's more familiar, is to use, you know, a simple concept of technology-assisted review or predictive learning to go through a slew of documents and code them, and then essentially run the machine learning and identify any other similar documents that may be key or hot or central to what you're trying to investigate. That may be a more familiar concept. One that I recently became aware of that I thought was pretty neat was this concept of sentiment analysis. And I think it's trending. I think we probably have seen it more applied on, say, social media posts or sort of the non-traditional ways to communicate, you know, tweets with hashtags, information that folks may be posting on blogs, but it actually is also interestingly applied to emails. So a simple concept that often, you know, we see in emails, or we may have all seen, is this phrase of, let's continue this discussion offline, right? Which may be just a passing reference, but we all know what that means is there's something happening offline. There's some kind of discussion happening, and essentially what the sentiment analysis is driven to do is to identify just emotions around various communications. I think one misnomer that we've already addressed kind of in the intro is that this concept of AI doesn't get rid of the human eyes-on review. I think that's critical. That's going to remain. And in terms of sentiment analysis, this requires a balancing of someone going in, and typically what you do is you assign, you know, a code or a numbering scheme to what the communication may be expressing, and then the technology will get run and identify any similar communications that may be expressing some kind of excitement, maybe expressing some kind of anger, or maybe expressing some kind of worry or further investigation, such as this kind of phrase of let's move this offline. And I'll end with this last thought on at least the pre-dispute side is AI is really useful also in catching anomalies. There's various technology that can flag what may be considered suspicious gaps or behavior, just in even email communication that may be a bit odd. For example, Jane Doe, based on her email that you've been reviewing, say she's logging in at 7 a.m. Central every day to start her day. At some point in time, she starts though to communicate around midnight and other odd times of the day. There's technology that can detect, well, hey, this is an anomaly. It'll give you an opportunity to go through and kind of dig deeper and at least help you prioritize points in time. And again, the ask in the pre-dispute side is, who's involved, what's happening, where is this happening? Again, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. And so technology is really critical, at least on that part. And it doesn't answer all the problems, but what it can do is help you get to the answers a lot more quickly. And I love the word efficient, so I'll say a lot more efficiently as well. Excellent.
Charles, any follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, I think, there are two things that sort of really, really stood out there. There are naturally in the corporate world, internal investigations, audit, compliance, HR side, some sort of complaint or some sort of knowledge is brought forth that kicks off that entire process, right? And there's typically always, that doesn't make sense. There's typically some sort of internal collection and investigation of data that will get you some answers towards the beginning, right? So pre-litigation, you're going to have some facts. Now, for the same reason that we use these tools in the, typically what we think of the general e-discovery litigation process, mass review, et cetera, those tools are used internally. Now, you don't have all the rules and regulations internally. You don't have to follow and use validation and QA and defense techniques that are required in mainstream litigation, like when you're having to create productions and of course look for privilege and so on. But all of the exact same tools are used. So as an internal auditor, I might use something like sentiment analysis to look for a disgruntled employee, right? To, let's say, and it applies to a wide range of different types of cases, intellectual property, right? I want to use sentiment analysis on IP theft because most likely at some point, a person that would be the perpetrator of conducting that type of behavior is going to have said something to someone. You would think that they wouldn't, but that's not the way humans actually think. We put a lot more in email and social media than we think we really do. If you look at HR claims, wrongful termination, there's going to be some sentiment around, an employee emailing another employee complaining about how their boss is treating them, right? And while they're not using maybe specific terms, the sentiment AI can pick up the negativity automatically, right? And pick up the pressure if the boss is putting pressure on an employee, right? It even goes so far as to determine sarcasm, right? So we call that sentiment alternation, right? So you might have, think about an email where you have many good things said, so positive things said, and then it switches to someone taking a jab at someone like that, very sarcastically, but to the AI, it looks highly negative, right? So that swinging from high positive to high negative is a very, very good, or the other way around, is a very good indicator of sarcasm, right? So we can catch all sorts of types of behavior when it comes to pre-dispute investigations. The other thing I would say is this notion of pre-built models. So Samara mentioned tagging documents and predicting on the remainder of that data set. That's fantastic. What we, especially if you don't have a better place to start, what the technology is beginning to do now is have what we call pre-built models. And you might have a pre-built model looking for fraud, kickback scheme, privilege, pricing and fee documents, behavioral anomalies, especially when it comes to negative, like, sexually explicit behavior when it comes to HR cases. And these models, before you get to the legal aspect of the spectrum, you can immediately apply those models, even if the model has never seen your data, but it really doesn't need to know the proper nouns, right? It doesn't need to know the people's names or the company's names. What it does is it's looking at human language. When someone is conducting nefarious behavior, or they're pressuring someone, or with a high degree of negativity, they tend to speak a certain way, right? And that's just human nature. And that's what those models are specifically pinpointing. And the more you can do pre-litigation, the better you are prepared for that litigation. So it is highly valuable to use these tools, from a corporate perspective internally.
And I'll add, Charles, I failed to mention, but it struck me when you were talking about hidden or nefarious behavior, that the use of code words is also very common in a lot of the employee investigation type work that we do. So these are not sort of the typical search terms that you would think to run, but it's something that technology could support as you're finding, how folks may be discussing their quote unquote nefarious activities. So it's just you learn a lot, right, when you work on the pre-dispute side. But to your point, I think it is important, and AI can help you be more efficient and in some cases avoid the litigation dispute.
That's right. Good point.
Excellent. Well, Dawad, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Absolutely. AI provides invaluable insights into your data. Just a practical use of sentiment analysis. Sentiment analysis is critical, is one of the critical pieces of AI. But a practical use of AI when using sentiment analysis, just filtering for communications with high levels of intent or pressure, for example. There's also an AI tool called image analysis that's actually searches for pictures and labels of the pictures in your data set. So let's just say social media is critical to the case, and you're dealing with somebody who is claiming work discrimination because he has an injury. You can use image analysis to identify a picture, right, which shows him weightlifting in a gym when he falsely claimed that he was injured on the job. So that's also a great tool that's up and coming in AI. There's also entity extraction, where entity extraction or pattern identification allows you to extract critical pieces of information, such as email addresses. You could identify the pseudonyms or false email addresses that they're hiding behind. So AI really allows you to unveil or uncover malfeasant or suspicious behavior. So you can even search for employee A sending communications to his personal email address, right, and the volume of those communications or the lack thereof, to really deep dive and review content that will really be the smoking gun in your case.
Yeah, I'll give a little. I don't want to keep us from moving on to the next topic, but the image recognition is more valuable than we thought.
Right.
Naturally, construction, litigation, there are many photos. You want to be able to segregate. Let's say you have 1,000 photos. You don't want to look at them all, right? You want to know where there are people, where there is flooding, where there are animals, where there are, there's tens of thousands of different things that the technology is able to recognize. And if you only really need the 100 or so that have people in them, rather than looking at all 1,000, the AI will tell you that there are people in them, and you can filter on that and just look at those. I mean, the cases that I've seen even here recently, just enormous cost, because what else are you going to do? You're going to have to look at every single one of them. You no longer have to do that.
Right. And I'll add to that, you're preaching good, Charles. The benefit of AI is to piece the puzzle of your story together so that you can either defend or argue the merits of the case. And that's the beauty of AI, rather than having to manually deep dive or try to review every single document within your data set.
Excellent. Well, let's assume that things didn't go your way in pre-suit, and now there's a complaint, or there's soon to be a complaint, whether you're going to form the complaint or you just received one. Let's talk a little bit about early assessment in dealing with initial case filings. Sumera, why don't you lead us off on that one?
Sure, and I'll piggyback, because I think a lot of what we have just talked about plays very well into this early assessment phase, where you're still, trying to navigate, who knew what and when, and put that puzzle piece together. I think my takeaway on this, and where I'll focus my comments, is more on the unsupervised AI that can be used in terms of visual analytics, trying to connect the dots. There's a lot that you can tell, and through just identifying, say it's just simple email metadata. Who are the folks that are communicating with each other? Who are they communicating with? Can usually tell you who the key players are in the communications. There may be certain patterns that you see in terms of communications among certain individuals, email domains, date ranges. All of that is, we have a lot of help from AI and just visualizing what this all looks like, so you can slice a bit of that piece of the pie and focus on that. This concept of concept clustering, I think, is also an important one. There are real great tools now where you can, visually see, sometimes in a pie chart form or a cluster wheel, and you can, at least try to quickly identify what are the common concepts or themes. You can set up those clusters by what's being alleged, by whom, or how you need to respond. So there are various algorithms through machine learning and otherwise that can be combined a bit with the unsupervised aspects of artificial intelligence that again, kind of this combination of human review with both unsupervised and supervised learning that can just again, supercharge your knowledge of what was happening. And oftentimes, at least on the litigation front, you don't have a lot of time in terms of what the federal rules may require you to know or respond to. At least you have to kind of quickly get a quick handle. And long are the days where you would have to thumb through documents and every document to better understand what may be happening. But I think that's where AI best benefits sort of that early assessment phase is maybe just to kind of have the visual analytics to understand the who's who, who's talking with whom, etc.
Excellent. Dawad, any thoughts?
Yeah, Simar, you address a very good point, identifying who's talking to whom. And using AI, you can utilize communication maps to find more about allegations regarding certain communications that are in the complaint. Because complaints contain allegations between parties, between one party and a person or organization not party to the lawsuit, between individuals associated with the party, such as employees of a defendant party or company, or between individuals or organizations, right? So AI or communication analysis really allows you to pit people together, persons of interest together, assess the volume of those communications, and allow you to see, or allow you to unveil other individuals of interest that you would not even known without using this communication or conversation analysis. So there's a lot you can glean from AI. I would also speak to concept searching. You can run a concept search You could search for concepts and use those tools, such as you mentioned clustering, which is a vital tool, to find high-level concepts quickly, drill in for greater details, and ultimately get to potentially key messages and other content. In one example, if you're in a lawsuit and the lawsuit is about an allegedly defective product, for example, you could create a concept search for that defective product and return much more documents related to that concept that you would never have even thought of. Also, I would also add that keywords are not going away, right? All the attorneys on the call love keywords and they're not going away, and you can still keep the keywords. But there's also a nice function right out the gate that you can use called keyword expansion. Keyword expansion is a function where you can use a search term, a keyword, and expand on that term and derive more terms that are conceptually related to that term, which you never would have thought of to help you argue or defend your case, which will broaden the net, so to speak, and derive really, really interesting information about your case.
Excellent. Charles, any follow-up thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I have. I want to tie that all a little bit together. So, Dawad, the keyword expansion thing, I think is huge. You know, it goes back to what we were mentioning earlier, right? You take what you know, which is your key term list, and then we want to see what is actually in the data. And it accomplishes, especially with the concept search for the keyword expansion, it accomplishes two things, both highly valuable. One, it gets you the other related information, including code words, to go back to what Samara was mentioning. We see that all the time with concept search. You'll end up finding some phrases that look kind of funny. You probably want to say, show me the documents that are talking about that. And because they could absolutely be keywords. We see that in live cases all the time. And then also you want to counteract for overly broad terms, right? And so is your term the best term? Meaning, is it going to give me some relevant documents? Sure, but is it going to get me 1,000 non-relevant to get the 50 relevant? Or can I cut down that non-relevant population and cut down on the burden, time, and cost? You know, just thinking about proportionality there as well. The last thing I'll say is, and it was amazing when I saw this real time, a state government in the Northeast, I don't know if I can say which one, but they were using some AI technologies, and what we ended up doing was, they were drawing up a complaint based on certain allegations, right? And they used all of these tools to become more informed in a shorter amount of time, outlining more facts in the complaint, right? So that's one. And then in a different case, naturally, and a different point in time, the answering party was using the AI technologies, and I was there sort of coaching them in ways to do that. And one of the things that we ended up doing was taking the complaint itself, literally copying and pasting the facts laid out, and put that entire thing into a concept search, just everything. And so it said, well, if you're interested in these things, go find things like that similar in my data, right? So I mean, you can literally take an entire document, an email from a whistleblower, a list of facts in a complaint, just take the whole thing and throw it right into a concept search. And more than likely, in a very, very short amount of time, you'll be able to get some really key information.
Very good points. Anybody else have anything they want to add on complaint assessment? All right. So we've done our pre-dispute. We've used AI to assess the complaint and gather some key facts. So let's talk about how we can use AI to augment the preservation and collection for those custodians or of that data. Let's start with Charles on this one.
Sure, I'll keep going. You know, the theme here, if it isn't already apparent, is that these technologies can be used in just about every phase of e-discovery and internal investigation. And even though the case type may change and the part in the process is changing, we're still using the same tools, right? Just in slightly different ways and for a different purpose. And so when we think about the preservation and collection, certainly from a preservation standpoint, you become aware that allegations are made that there is a lawsuit or potential for a lawsuit, right? And you need to take certain action with preservation that could of data that could potentially be relevant. Well, how do you know that, right? How do you know it could be potentially relevant? You can certainly lock down or, you know, put on a preservation hold a more massive amount of data than you need to. Maybe that case goes away quick and everything's great, but also counteracting some retention policies if that case goes on too long and you sort of over preserved, if you will. If you think about a cluster wheel and concept search, being able to search what is likely to be relevant from a preservation standpoint is key. And then on the other side, the actual collection piece, one of the interesting things, I was speaking to a very, very large law firm, and one of the things that the items that kind of stood out was we can collect less in the beginning and run these advanced analytics. Sure, you don't have all of the data just yet, but you can learn a lot on a little that will then inform the remainder of your collection process, right? And if you can more accurately target your collections while still having a defensible process and collecting what is reasonable, if you can augment that process with an understanding of who else was involved, what areas internally on my servers are likely to have information relevant or potentially relevant to that case, in those ways I can augment my collection while the initial collection process doesn't need to be as broad. So we do it faster, we learn more upfront, and then we let the AI help us augment our ability to create better, more targeted, hopefully smaller collections, but that still hold the valuable data.
Samara, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I'll just add, you know, on the collection side, to be efficient, I would agree that we have to, you know, keep a reasonable but hopefully narrow scope. And there are various, excuse me, data mapping type techniques that can be applied to best understand where the key data may be, especially in this day and age of everything is centered around data and we're outside of the realm of it's all just an email. Data can, you know, we're even in our organization here, a lot of collaborative tools, new use of, you know, remote technology. And so just getting a grasp of, you know, where that data may be to make sure that you're pushing along and connecting the dots on a chronology that kind of ties in the various pieces that we've already talked about. But I think AI is helpful in that respect too. And again, just understanding where your key data sources may be, and what helps to do that is to understand, you know, what are the key facts, again, the who, what, where, when, why, how. But I think my takeaway on the collection part would just be, you know, leverage any kind of data mapping techniques or you know, ways to better understand where that data is. And to Charles's point, you know, the narrowest you can go is probably the most efficient from a time and cost perspective. So it all kind of circles in together.
Excellent. All right, well, moving on. After we've collected the data, picked through it a bit, let's talk about getting ready to ask some people some questions about that data. Preparing for depositions. Charles, why don't you start us off with Your thoughts on that topic?
Sure, from both sides, it's important, whether you're prepping your witness or countering another. You need to understand what's in the data and what you need to prep your witness for, and also the best possible questions for opposing party witnesses that they bring in. And to be able to do that, there's a really interesting, we talk about a cluster wheel, right? Cluster wheel is essentially a map of your data, right? You throw a bunch of data at the AI and say, show me what's in there, right? Now, it doesn't have to stop on the entire data set. You can actually build mini cluster wheels, some call them focuses, where a new cluster wheel, sort of a new data map, is built on a particular person, right? On a particular person in a certain time frame, talking to someone else on a certain topic, right? So you can change those parameters however you like, but it's give me a subset that I care about, and now show me a map of that data. And especially for deposition, I want to know everything this person knows, right? In the context of the data that I have in the case that I'm currently involved in. And so I can build a map of that person. Now, I might use other AI techniques to exclude, let's say, easily identifiable non-relevant data, right? Junk data, other types that I don't care about. But when it comes to understanding what that person knows and augmenting the creation of the questions that will be used, having a data map on a person level is a very, and it's visual, right? So you can glean much more information than you otherwise could have by building that visual aspect. And I think that is one of the very creative uses of visual analytics that can be applied to depo prep, right? Show me everything this person knows so that I can get a really good understanding and either create, prepare my witness better or create better questions.
Excellent point.
So I'm gonna jump right in because I think Charles gave some very great points on visualization. So the goal of preparing for a deposition is to know your deponent, and to know your deponent well. And there are key and important AI strategies or tools that you can do to do that. I go back to entity extraction, where you can derive the name of the deponent, all the email addresses associated with that deponent, and derive the topics, some of the main topics of conversation that deponent was involved in. You could also glean from false pseudonyms, email addresses, concepts, identities of people that the deponent communicated with, who the deponent communicated with, the volume of those communications. So there's a lot you can use AI to help you prepare for deposition. You could also, we spoke about AI models, pre-configured AI models. You can also use an AI model to prepare for depositions. If you know what topics you want to explore with a deponent, then you could utilize TAR, for example, to jumpstart the identification of what's relevant and prioritize those documents for your review, especially speaking to sexual harassment or discrimination, if you know those kind of topics related to your case as well. Concept searching is another tool that you can use to prepare for deposition. It puts you at the lead or the driver's seat, so to speak, and you can search for concepts that are relevant. You can use tools like Charles emphasized, cluster wheel, to derive high-level concepts, to gain more information that's key to preparing for deposition. So yeah, there's a lot of AI tools that will put you in the best position to prepare for a deposition.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, let's move on to our next topic, which is document review, which will be the subject of a future deep dive webinar. So we don't want to get too crazy here, but Dewey, why don't you go ahead and keep going and talk to us a little bit about case assessment and doc review using AI.
Yeah, so I go back to the 5 foundation pillars that you would use to file a complaint, right? Or when investigating a matter: who, what, where, when, how, and why. The goal would be to use what you know to search for key information in the case. So who, for example, who, okay? Who are the persons of interest in the case, and who were they talking to about a key topic? And there are tools such as communication analysis, conversation analysis, AI, that enables you to see the communicants, who they're talking to, and the volume of those conversations, and the main concepts or topics that are most prevalent in those conversations. You can use tools such as pattern identification, or metadata facets AI to identify email addresses associated with communicants, which reveal, and I mentioned this in another slide, which would also reveal personal addresses to analyze the communications sent or received that are relevant to your case. And then there's what, right? What is the case about? You can use the pleading or complaint that we talked about to assist in creating search terms, but use AI to unveil other terms that you wouldn't normally think about. And I mentioned this, and I emphasize it again, keyword expansion, and even use, and Charles mentioned this before, so you're definitely my notes, Charles. But you can use the paragraph in your pleading, or the pleading itself, or the complaint itself, to unveil documents that are conceptually relevant to your search. Not to go too deep into these tools, but just in brief to mention what you can use to benefit your own workflows. I mentioned keyword expansion, that's obvious. Concept search, and this categorization. Categorization, I believe, in my opinion, is a less utilized tool, because what categorization allows you to do in case assessment / document review is allow you to leverage your own issue coding and train the machine to find more like these, and categorize the conceptually related documents that it identifies to those issues that they are most closely related to. And then this clustering, you can use that to quickly weed out and exclude clearly irrelevant documents while honing in on the most relevant information using your key clusters. Then there's when. You can define or derive important dates or timeframes by which critical facts took place, such as when employer A harassed employer B, by honing in on information unveiled using communication AI, for example. And then there's where. Take advantage of entity extraction or pattern identification to identify places or locations of critical information unveiled by your search queries. So the beautiful thing about all these AI tools that I mentioned is that you can use the search results for one result and build on the search of another. A concept search, for example, will reveal a key fact, which will reveal additional key people, for example, at issue in the case, using communication AI. The objective is for you to know about the case, to train the machine enough with tools such as concept searching to uncover additional conceptual relevant documents, to gain an understanding of how terms relate to one another, and unveil or disclose the how, right? And put the pieces of the case together in a way that will help you argue or defend your case. You can also leverage just an additional thought on clustering. You can leverage clustering to review your search results to include or exclude based on relevance. And then utilize active learning, TAR 2.0, to use what you have identified in your cluster review to train the machine and identify / prioritize additional responsive documents according to relevance and gain additional review efficiencies in your case. What you can also do using AI during the case assessment phase and the document review phase is to perform a close scrutiny of documents that contain sensitive information for compliance regulations. So you can utilize, again, entity extraction to identify PII information, sensitive information, to redact or to withhold from your document review process, or extract invaluable metadata with regards to patterns to hone in on malfeasance conduct or behavior.
Excellent.
Covered all out there, Dawn.
Yeah, well, you know, I'd like to give the audience a good piece of the pie before we actually get into it.
Samara, Charles, anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I would say that was very comprehensive, and I would just say ditto. The only other topic that came to mind was outside of reviewing the documents to gather facts to just continue to build out the chronology. There are other tools, and I know I've used them as outside counsel and as in-house counsel to an international insurance company. There are a lot of foreign languages often that you see come through in documents and communications, and there are now great tools that can apply machine learning and otherwise help you translate and better understand what those documents are, so you're not guessing or having to go out and retain other folks and incur costs. So I would just add that as kind of the theme of efficiency, that AI, outside of helping you gather and investigate the facts, can also just make things far more efficient, whether it's a foreign language document, or we've talked about image review or audio or video review. So we have come a long way, and AI is very useful for those types of files as well.
Yeah, and think about, so I have a file that is non-English. I need it to be in English, right? Thousands of them, or maybe another language. And some applications now have, let's say, translation, image recognition, speech to text, right? So audio, video to text directly built in. But you don't want to stop there, right? We want to take the translated text and the speech to text output and put those through the analytics as well, right? So we want to learn from that. So it's not just that there's translation or transcription, right? We want to use the output of that and filter that through the analytics. See, I wrote down a few topics, but I want to be cognizant of time. There are two things that I want to point out. One, there are visual in the way of visualizations. It's one thing to use your key terms and cross-reference that with, let's say, a concept search, what is actually in the data, learning more. But it's also important to understand the points in time where those terms that are valuable to you are co-occurring, right? So over the course of, let's say, a month or a week, those topics are being discussed more and more at the same time. So let's not stop at concept search. Let's figure out, once we do have the additional facts, is it September of 2000 where all of these terms are being talked about more at the same time? Because you can imagine that if they are, that is probably a pretty important, very valuable point in time. So it's not that we wouldn't review files outside that time frame, but if I'm looking to get valuable information now, I'm going to learn my terms and find out a point in time where it's most likely to be valuable. Give me that first so I can learn, and then we'll expand out to the remainder. The last thing is from a QA perspective, right? Document review is document review, but there are going to be some QA, QC mechanisms that you'll need to put in place. One of those, we talked about a new wheel on a person for enhancing deposition prep, right? We can also build, let's say, a new visual wheel on everything that I have not looked at yet, right? So you are coming to the close of an investigation. You might feel like you've gotten at least proportionally amount of relevant data. Why not take a low effort, high value approach? Say, show me what else I have visually, right? And something might come up, it might not. If it didn't, great, 2 minutes gone. If it did, though, you might glean some really important information where you were close to being done, so to speak. I'll go ahead and stop there so that we can move to the case assessment. I mean, you can use pretty much every single AI technology for case assessment. But yeah, that was good. Dawad, thank you for that. And I just wanted to piggyback on the term heat map. So co-occurrence of terms and some QA procedures visually.
Excellent. Great point about using analytics to show you what lives in everything you haven't looked at yet. That's something a lot of people overlook, I think. Speaking of show me what do I have, let's talk about document production analysis, what AI can do for you when opposing counsel sends you one giant PDF file for a production, for example, or analyzing your own productions. Dawad, why don't you take the lead on that one, if you would?
Yeah, sure. Review is still the most expensive phase of discovery, so you don't want to spend even more time reviewing with an even limited budget income productions. That's a complete waste of time, especially when you're dealing with large scale productions and you are the plaintiff. So all the more important to utilize AI strategies to reduce time and spend on this part of the review, placing emphasis, of course, on AI allowing you to do more with less. So starting with low-hanging fruit strategy. Most everyone knows that you can apply email threading to streamline the review of inclusive and unique content. I'm not going to belabor the point there. That's been done to death. So I'm not going to talk about that at length. You can also leverage textual near duplicate identification and analytics to handle non-MD5 hash duplicates for ESI from data sources other than email. Structured database exports and proprietary data formats and the like. For example, what you can do there is sample the results of this process with varying textual similarity scores, 97, 98, 99, for example, and determine a minimum threshold for what could be considered duplicative and based upon data type, and promote consistent coding decisions across the entire group. But what I like the most is just using your coding work product related to responsiveness / relevance and leveraging what you have already coded to identify relevant documents in your incoming productions. So that's using an AI model, such as TAR 2.0 active learning, to leverage your coding decisions as example documents or seed documents to find similar docs in the incoming production to prioritize highly relevant ranked documents and batch those highly ranked and relevant documents to your review team to accelerate the review of the incoming productions. This solves the low richness issues when the production's prevalence is low. If you don't have coding work product, then that's okay, because you could always utilize clustering to review irrelevant similar content in those clusters while weeding out obvious irrelevant content. You can then use the relevant documents tagged as a result of your cluster review and use those as seed documents to your AI model, and let the model train on those documents to identify other relevant documents in your production. And I would also add here, you can still use your keywords, but use or augment your keywords using keyword expansion to yet again identify terms that could broaden the net and help identify documents based upon conceptual similarity. But the goal would be to visualize the data and buckets for more targeted review.
Excellent points. Charles, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to go back to one thing that Dawad mentioned, the the text-based exact duplicates, right? Hopefully you're not going to get hash code duplicates unless maybe they're a family member to a relevant email. That could certainly happen if they're producing by email. But what you could get is a Word document converted to a PDF. They have the same text. They're both relevant. You get both of those. When you receive that production, do you need to look at both? Most likely not, right? And so the text-based exact duplicates, you can immediately chop that chunk of data off, set it aside, and run your searches, look at your clustering, everything in context of truly unique data, right? I really love that one. That is a one-click thing. And you can easily chop off 10, 15, sometimes more percent of an incoming production. The other thing I'll say is, as you're using the initial finding from what you've collected internally, let's say as a plaintiff, you already know some about your data, you receive the incoming production, immediately apply what you've learned from the first, from your internal data in the form of predictive analytics, right, TAR, to the second. And you're not necessarily, this sort of goes outside the realm of incoming productions, but you don't need to really run any sort of validation or defense if you're just using the predictive analytics for sorting, right? That is actually goes pretty deep into our next webinar that we'll talk about review acceleration, amongst other things. But I'm a huge fan of using predictive analytics on every single case you ever do, at least for sorting. And there is no defense or validation needed if you're just sorting. You sort in all sorts of ways right now, and you don't have to inform anyone of that you sort it chronologically, right? Same thing for predictive analytics if you're just using it for sorting. In that case, you don't necessarily care about the prediction. The prediction is there. And you should use the high ranking documents first, because why would you not? But just using it for sorting. And as soon as you receive that incoming production, apply the model, sort it, your review of that data will go faster, and you'll get the most likely to be most valuable. Hopefully the entire production is relevant, right? But what is most valuable to you, that's not the same thing. So I 100% agree with the points that Dawad made.
Excellent. Samara, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think Dawad made a great point, which is review is the costliest part of the EDRM cycle. And I would say of that, sometimes the portion, just from my experience as outside counsel, oftentimes the incoming production review costs get overlooked because everyone is so hyper-focused on, meeting your Rule 26G requirement to make a reasonable, defensible effort to get your data out the door. Oftentimes you're left with a very minimal budget, or otherwise, the appetite to sift through the documents that you've received from the other party oftentimes does get overlooked. Although that, and the concept is, that you may have perceived as junk, depending on what perhaps, even your ESI protocol says, or whatever other measures you have in place to try to agree on a protocol. I'd say that for one, but I think on the document production review side, this is a great example of how you can combine what you've learned from unsupervised learning with supervised learning, leveraging all the various techniques that we've talked about in terms of, the threading, the near dupe, the concept clustering, filtering out maybe those GIF files, the files that are just pure junk, kicking those out, and then doing some human review to essentially prioritize, what may be most important.
Good deal. All right, final section, jury selection, which is my addition, something that's a little near and dear to my heart. So For everyone's benefit, I'll sort of explain what my team situations have been and how we've used analytics to help us with trial. Simply put, we have trials sometimes in small places, counties out in rural areas where the entire county may only be 20, 30,000 people. So we're selecting jury pools that have relatives of plaintiffs, associates of opposing counsel, whatever the case may be. So we have developed a bit of a playbook where we run witnesses, counsel, jurors, family members through a bit of a process and collect data from them, or about them, I should say. And then we input all of that data into an analytics system where we look for commonality that's not otherwise apparent. For an example, a shared address of opposing counsel's sister and the sister of a juror, which implies that there may be, a second-degree connection there. One thing we found especially helpful is to try to gather up information regarding what church people attend, because we found that jurors, seems like all of my trials, someone on the jury knows someone we wish they didn't because of church. So whatever we can gather, whatever is publicly available, either just through social media or through some information aggregation services, we gather all that up, we load it in, and then we ask the system to show us anything that's not obvious to us. And that helps us inform people that may be favorable or less favorable to our client at trial. And then we carry that information over from case to case, sometimes even from client to client, where we will input data from a different client because they're in the same state, same county as a previous matter that we handled for a different client. And sometimes that, presents facts that we may have missed otherwise. Anybody else have any thoughts that they want to add to that? Or any other unusual uses not covered elsewhere within the AI wheel here?
I'll say a couple of things. One, I just thought about this about jury selection. I think that's very creative, first of all. But in the realm of social media, it's actually now possible to use AI on emojis. I don't know if people know that, but a smiley face is going to be positive, right? I was working with a police department out of New York, and they were looking at sort of youth violence, right? A little bit outside of what we're talking about today, but it's certainly creative. And so what they would do is retrieve social media accounts from younger kids at risk, let's say, and an ambulance meant I'm going to hurt you, right? So that's a negative, right? And so you can apply sentiment and different forms of AI to learn even on emojis now. And I think that goes directly into jury selection. If you're looking at, what people care about, their thoughts on certain topics, emojis display that very well and very often, right? I wanted to point that out because I thought that was, I've never thought about that before. So.
No, I'll just add it's interesting, right? Because what Steve, what you mentioned on the jury selection shows that not only is AI a concept that's evolving in the e-discovery space, but it's just a concept that's evolving in general, right? As the different ways we now are communicating with each other are changing, so is AI. And AI is not only helpful for efficiency purpose on the e-discovery front, but it can be a key player or a driving factor in various aspects, whether it's litigation, or I know, here at our company, there are uses of AI across the various business units. So it's a very trending topic, but yeah, the use of it on the jury side, I think is important too.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I never heard about that before. That's awesome. That's pretty cool. Well, I would add, just to along the vein of using AI outside of discovery, I found out pretty recently that AI is being used in legal research. I'm not too sure whether anyone on this panel heard about that, but an attorney can search AI, run a query in this AI for certain case law. The AI will surface relevant passages of that law that are relevant, pre-reads it, and highlights it, and alerts the attorney regarding those relevant or pertinent passages of the case law that they're looking for. I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
There are many, many more examples we could talk about, but
Yeah.
we're coming up on the end here.
Yeah. So that being said, I don't see any questions in the chat. If there are any participants that want to chime in and ask a question, I'll give them a moment to take themselves off of mute and speak up.
I think everyone's walking the ILTA floor.
Yeah.
Multitasking.
I'm going to say it's because you guys did such a thorough job covering everything that there's really no questions left unanswered. Let's just look at it that way. Well, all right. In lieu of any questions, I'll give each of you just a quick moment to make any last statements, thoughts, takeaways that you might want to leave for the participants, starting with Samara.
Sure. Again, as I mentioned, as formerly outside counsel and now working as in-house counsel, there's a common theme, like I mentioned, of efficiency. And what the even more forceful factor in that is that knowledge is power. So AI is just another mechanism that we all, as from an attorney perspective, from a support perspective, from a client perspective, the more we know, whether it's pre-dispute, during dispute, during depo, after depo, even at the point of trial, is just all the more better for our positions, for our matters. And again, I think, as I mentioned, we're all creatures of habit. AI is a new thing, but it is certainly trending in various aspects. So it's something that I would encourage everyone to get familiar with, because we know it's right on the horizon. There are various tools and various vendors that I know I've used that have done a really fantastic job in making my job more efficient, not only from a time perspective, but also from a cost perspective. So I will say, as I close out, thank you all again for having me. I think this was an excellent topic, and I very much enjoyed it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for participating. Dawad, what do you have to, what wisdom do you have to leave us with today?
I don't think companies are utilizing and applying AI enough in their cases. It is commonplace at this point that AI is used to streamline the review phase of discovery, but what we don't necessarily think about is using AI to the left of the EDRM even before a complaint is filed. AI provides invaluable insights into your data, and you could, as soon as you start gathering or receiving data, you can evaluate the data and assess communication trends, important people, key facts, to get a quick start on locating data that you would need to perform a close scrutiny of or deep dive document review process, and at the same time setting aside what's not relevant.
Well put. Charles.
Yeah, kind of in the same vein. If you have, I'll put it, I'm asked quite often, at what point would you use AI in a case, document count wise, right? And I think it's, if you have more than a couple of hundred document, literally that low, you should probably be using at least some form of AI, right? There are many different forms of AI. We probably listed maybe, if we were to count them individually, maybe 15 different types today. Just because they're out there doesn't mean you have to use them all. It's like a Swiss Army knife, right? Get get the tweezers and not the knife when you don't need the knife, right? So you employ these technologies as you need them, but they're always there for you. And they're being built directly into the tools now. You don't have to have 5 different tools anymore. And the cost associated is becoming cheaper and cheaper. And that, coupled with the data getting larger and larger, there's really no reason not to. I would, and the last thing is, be creative. Think outside the box of when you're going to use the, jury selection. Before I spoke to Steve about doing this webinar, I never thought about using AI for jury selection. I find that amazing, right? It's very, very creative. And what we're finding out is every single aspect of the discovery process, pre, post, every step in the process, you can use at least some form of AI to make things more accurate, more efficient, get you the valuable, weed out the non-valuable so you don't waste your time looking at it. Always use AI if you have more than a couple entered documents.
Well put. I think it all comes down to working smart instead of hard. Asterisk whenever possible, right? Well, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. It was very informative. Hopefully everyone takes away something that they can go back to their team with to help them work a little smarter instead of harder. Just a quick reminder, again, we will have part 2 of these deep dives coming up in probably sometime in the 4th quarter of this year. And in mid-October, we will be doing a vendor technology showcase showcasing some artificial intelligence tools, some demonstrations of how these things are actually practically used. And that will coincide with an in-person social happy hour shindig. Details will be forthcoming. So again, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of our attendees. We appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to seeing you guys on the next iteration of this series.
And special thanks again to Samara. Thank you for being a panelist.
Of course. No, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Samara.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Have a good day.